We are back on MorningLine. This morning we are talking, as you see, replacement theory, domestic terrorism and the like, and the aftermath of some of these mass shootings, including the one in Buffalo, New York. Lynda Williams is with us. She is a professor at MTSU, former U.S. Secret Service Deputy Assistant Director. It's very good to have her on talking about this. We can take some phone calls. We're not only on the Plus this morning, but we also are streaming live on Facebook at newschannel5.com. We can monitor any questions or comments there. By the way, Professor, again, you know, when most people hear Secret Service, they think, oh, they're the ones that provide security for the president. They're the ones around him trying to make sure he is safe. What other duties, I mean, in your years, more than 2 decades, nearly 3 decades with the Secret Service, what else were you involved with? What else does the Secret Service do?
So the Secret Service has a dual mission, investigation and protection. As you stated, we're most noted with protecting the president, the first family, former presidents, and any other protectee that is designated by Congress. But again, the Secret Service was created to suppress counterfeit currency that was in population after the Civil War. And so those investigations still go on today. Of course, it has transitioned into any kind of financial challenges that the United States are faced with, in addition to identity theft, any kind of anything that goes against the financial infrastructure of the United States, from identity theft to fraud, credit card, larger schemes. And of course, this lap over into a lot of other investigations, because most investigation behind it is some source of monetary financing. And so that's where the Secret Service come in with a lot of other organizations on task force to come into such investigations, as such as it is when it comes to terrorism.
Okay, and that's one of the things that you deal with as a professor now at MTSU, domestic terrorism, correct?
That is correct. That's one of the many courses that I teach.
And I wonder, just from your perspective, having been around this for so long, when you see incidents like in Buffalo, New York, and others, you can go back to Oklahoma City and Timothy McVeigh, and we talk about terrorism, we often think about hostile forces from outside this country coming in here. How great a threat is domestic terrorism in this country? Is it greater now than in the past? How does it compare to threats that we may perceive from outside the country?
Absolutely. And thank you for that. You know, first and foremost, the jurisdiction of terrorism fall under the auspices of the FBI. Again, a lot of those investigations overlap. When we first thought about terrorists, when that word came into play, you know, that was something when I was a little girl that you heard that happened on the 6 o'clock news, and Walter Cronkite was talking about it over on Foreign Souls. But now it has transitioned to domestic terrorism. And let me just say, there's no universal definition of terrorism. There are characteristics, and that's violence and the use of violence to utter a change politically. And so that's what we see now when people are displeased. You know, there are constitutional ways in voting to make that difference. But when people take that into their own hand and use that measure of intimidation and violence, then it is terrorism. And it is even more a greater challenge that is domestic. Because think about it, we walk around every day, anybody could be a terrorist. You know, it's one thing to be a terrorist, but the terroristic act is what caused us alarm, because we are free to think what we want to think. But when we take those ideations and we try to impose them on someone else because we disagree, then we have that domestic terrorism, and it comes out in any sector of our society. You know, it's not an ideal, you know, composite of what a terrorist look like, because it's that person's ideology that they believe and what they believe, and they use that violence or their fear of violence to try to make that change. And that's what we saw that occurred in Buffalo. It was bad, it was satanic, it was demonic, it was terrorism at its most, and genocide, that just because you don't agree to a person, a culture of people, who are you to think that you can take such into your own hands.
Right, and that's where you wonder sometimes in these cases, and I don't know with regard to this 18-year-old out of Buffalo, they got indoctrinated somehow when they get involved, whether it's him or others, and you wonder sometimes whether or not it's part of some organized effort, okay, to bring about some political change, or if it's just a single individual that's just gone off the rails. I mean, there's a distinction there. Both are bad. I imagine an organized effort is something that you would consider to be more of a threat even than just one individual acting out.
And that's how it plays itself. You brought a very interesting act. Like when we were dealing with Al-Qaeda and all of those other international, those were organized terrorist group. And of course, when there's a larger population, there gives us, a bigger blueprint that we can follow, that we can. But what you're explaining here that happens domestically is a lone wolfer. That's someone that might not be a card-carrying member of any terrorist group, but they align to that ideation and they give credence to that. And so, of course, that just, makes that organization just more prominent and giving them more propaganda that someone aligned to that. But the challenge is with a lone wolf, they're not a card-carrying member. They're not always an actual member of that organization. A lot of times they have not even, been in in conversation with anybody on the larger scale, but they believe in that. And so, of course, they're out perpetuating that ideology. And the challenge is because we're everyday citizens, just like how that man came into that store. He was a U.S. citizen, even though it was a populated, African-American populated community. I mean, there's no anomaly to a Black or brown person coming into any establishment. So that alone didn't raise eyebrows. But the fact that he knew and he had done his homework, that's where the challenge come in, because that shows you how a terrorist can be anonymous. And then, and there's the element of surprise that they can come into everyday life that we know in this American culture. That's the challenge, because it's hard to identify, because it's easier to follow a group and follow a pattern versus one individual that you have no knowledge of, that's never been on the grid.
I know, and when you think about how long you've been at it and how old I am, and you think back, now there's so much more available at someone's fingertip because of social media compared to 30 years ago, where now, I mean,
Absolutely.
On your own, you can go online and you can connect with people and all of this and be exposed to so much. Now, you made it very clear, of course, the FBI handles a lot of these investigations. There is some overlap with organizations like the Secret Service. But is there then, for these lone wolves that you talk about, is there any type of profile for someone like that that kind of matches up with the ones we've come across that makes them more prone for this? I'm sure each one that's finally caught, and arrested and, examined, you end up getting characteristics. Would you say there's a profile for individuals that are like this that can help you identify them?
And see, that's the challenge, Nick. You could be a terrorist. I could be a terrorist. And of course, we are definitely being hypothetical. There's not, because you don't have to belong to a certain sector of society. You don't have to be in a certain demographics or economic class. But it is more challenging for us in law enforcement because, like you said, social media, but the internet, they don't even have to go to the dark web to find this information. It is so easily, accessible. And of course, and it's assimilated. And of course, that's why we have to be fearful of what can become of that. Even with our lax gun laws and with the accessibility of people can get weapons without even a background check. So you think about it, that mental illness, that the ideation behind a terrorist thought, and then the accessibility of weapons, we have a very, very constant a real problem in our society. And that's why we see these things play out. They're always random because there is not a certain profile that a domestic terrorist.
Professor, you froze there for a moment, but I caught your meaning, I think, near the end of that. Every once in a while it freezes up. But I want to talk more. We do have a phone call or two for you as well. Let's take a few callers. A viewer watching. Fran, good morning. Fran, what's on your mind? Hi, Fran.
Hi. I have a question, and it's, please hear me out because I'm curious. I've been giving this lots of thought.
Sure.
I would like to know, we're talking about how these people are, it's harder to identify them. I understand that almost every one of them, not all of them, but a lot, including this young man, was brought in. He was examined mentally for his capacity and then released. Why do they not hold accountable the mental health doctors and therapists that see these people, just like they would a regular doctor for malpractice, when they say, hey, I'm sorry, they're okay, let them go. When it has been proven, or seems to be the norm, that these people, when they are, I hate to identify them as schizophrenic, et cetera, and this young man may not have been that way, but they let them, they're not held accountable, and then they go out and do these horrible things, and they go, oh, well, we couldn't hold them. They make judgment calls just like any doctor, and I don't understand why they can't be held accountable. And then maybe they would, I realize mental health is a judgment call, more than a physical, we've got to take this out. So what do y'all think about that?
Yeah.
Would that not help improve this situation if people that are on those doctors and therapist level?
Thank you for your call. Thank you. Yeah, what do you think? The mental aspect. So oftentimes we see these arrests made after the fact, and she's right. You look at it and you go, look at all these red flags. And, one case that just, recently was adjudicated here in Middle Tennessee, the case of Travis Reinking, who did the Waffle House shooting in Antioch and was recently convicted. But he had some mental health issues up in Illinois and had his guns taken away and then moved down here. I mean, there were red flags. How do you view that, Professor, when you're looking at these cases, trying to determine who might be a real actual threat? And maybe, let's keep in mind, most schizophrenics are not violent. What do you think?
So, she says some very valid things, but let's just say the culpability just don't lie with indeed. I think I'm frozen. Indeed, our country is suffering from mental illness. Until we, purposely and intentionally address this, we will see these kind of episodes just play over and over. Now, coming into a mental health facility or under the care of a doctor, that's just one portion of it. Even when people are submitted for psychiatric evaluation, they can only hold them for a minimum, a maximum of 3 days in some jurisdiction, and then they are released. We have a problem even as it relates in criminal justice because, again, our jail cells in our prisons are no more than holding cells for mentally ill because our country does not deal with mental illness. And so the culpability lies not only with the medical professors, but those families and those people that are around those people. And, we as a society, that's why I push that we have to be more proactive in our gun laws, because if one thing is not stopped, it leads to another. And when you have people like this that are, are walking around without, any covering, that, and they have accessibility, things play out. So mental illness is something that our country has to deal with in the very core, to not just in criminal justice, but across the board. And because there are civil liberties and because people have rights, they are only confined to mental institutions or hospital at a select period of time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I understood what her point was, but yours is a good one. I was thinking, you can't really, if someone comes in because they're having some issues mentally, hold them or confine them because you think they might commit a crime. I don't know if you remember that Tom Cruise movie Minority Report, where it was a futuristic thing where they would have some way of seeing the future and arresting someone before the crime occurred, which, again, in this country, you can't just arrest someone because you think, right? Exactly.
Right. So
it's tricky, and so certainly, I'll tell you this, I think most of these mental health evaluators these days err on the side of caution for no other reason. They worry that this person may go out and harm someone, but they can only hold them for so long, right?
Absolutely. Most jurisdiction, I know when I was in the District of Columbia, was the 72-hour evaluation when we had mentally ill persons that would come to the White House, and we would, submit them for evaluation. After their 72-hour, they were released. They would perhaps contact family members and stuff. But again, that same liberty that we're given, we cannot incarcerate, we cannot hold people beyond that threshold. But again, our society, we have to look at mental illness. It's the core of many things, and of course, it will only be exacerbated until such times that we change the accessibility to guns. If you remember this shooter, I mean, the arsenal that he had of,
Right.
weapons that, you don't get out of the Walmart or at a gun dealership. And so with mental illness, it's a fine line because that due process is still there. The culpability again lies with that family and those people in those individuals' lives, because it's just like your doctor. If you go for that particular day, the doctor gives you, the best advice and medication, but the doctor is not going to be with you 24/7. So the culpability lies in that village, that family, and those that are involved. And then, of course, when they come onto the radars of law enforcement, a lot of times is a little too late.
Exactly. In some of these cases we've seen where the parents, I wonder, they're just clueless and they don't see what should be obvious in that case. Listen, we'll take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk more. We're going to take some more phone calls for you and touch a bit more on the issue of guns. As you know, Tennessee is a Second Amendment state, people's rights to bear arms. But I think most responsible gun owners also believe that these guns should be kept out of the hands of those who will be irresponsible with them. We'll take a break and be back with more with the professor right after this.